The lesson. Supreme Arbiter. Korthak's private chambers occupied the highest spire of the tribunal complex on Prime, offering a spectacular view of the city's crystalline architecture. The massive alien stood before floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the celebration lights dance across the buildings below. Today had been a triumph for civilized justice, and tomorrow would bring new opportunities to guide the galaxy toward a more peaceful future. His four arms moved in a complex pattern of satisfaction as he reviewed the execution's aftermath. Public approval ratings across coalition worlds had spiked to their highest levels in decades. The human terrorist's death had been broadcast to every corner of the galaxy, sending a clear message about the consequences of violence against coalition citizens. Korthak activated his personal communication array and contacted the other members of the High Tribunal. Their faces appeared on screens throughout his chamber, a collection of the galaxy's most powerful and respected judicial minds. "My colleagues," Korthak began, his voice carrying the deep satisfaction of a job well done, "today, we have struck a blow for peace that will resonate throughout the galaxy. The human child's execution has already begun to show results. Intelligence reports indicate that human terrorist cells across 12 systems have gone into hiding." Magistrate Isandra, whose serpentine form coiled elegantly around her ceremonial perch, hissed her agreement. The psychological impact on their species cannot be overstated. Humans form powerful emotional attachments to their offspring. This demonstration of our resolve will break their will to resist. "Indeed," added Judge Korvalak, his methane-breathing apparatus creating small clouds around his bulbous head. "My analysts predict a 73% reduction in human-initiated violence within the next standard cycle." They spoke for another hour about the political ramifications, the improvement in coalition security, and the precedent they had set for dealing with other troublesome species. None of them noticed the shadows moving outside Korthak's windows, or the way the building's security systems had begun reporting normal status, even as they were systematically compromised. The first indication that something was wrong came when the lights went out, not just in Korthak's chamber, but throughout the entire tribunal complex. Emergency power should have activated immediately, but the backup systems remained silent. In the span of 3 seconds, one of the most secure buildings in the galaxy had been plunged into absolute darkness. "Security!" Korthak bellowed, his voice echoing off the chamber walls. "Restore power immediately!" But there was no response from the security station. No response from anywhere in the building. That's when they heard the music. It started softly, drifting through the complex's ventilation system like smoke. A simple melody, played on what sounded like a human piano, but carrying with it an undertone that made even the galaxy's most hardened judges feel a chill run through their alien physiologies. The song was Für Elise, though none of the coalition judges would have recognized it. To them, it was simply a haunting melody that seemed to promise something terrible approaching through the darkness. Emergency lighting finally activated, casting eerie red shadows throughout the complex, but the light revealed something that made Korthak's primary heart skip a beat. Standing in his chamber, having somehow entered without triggering any alarms, was a figure that belonged in nightmares. Baba Yaga stood perfectly still in the center of the room, his black armor seeming to absorb the emergency lighting. The helmet was a masterpiece of psychological warfare designed to trigger primal fear responses in dozens of different species. Where his face should be, there was only darkness and the suggestion of eyes that held no trace of mercy. "You executed my son," Baba Yaga said, his voice carrying the electronic modulation that would soon become the most feared sound in the galaxy. "You did it publicly. You made a celebration of his death." Korthak reached for the panic button that would summon every security force on the planet, but his hand never made it to the control. The figure in black moved faster than any being had a right to move, crossing the chamber in a single fluid motion that spoke of perfect predatory efficiency. "I wouldn't," Baba Yaga whispered, now standing close enough that Korthak could see his own terrified reflection in the dark helmet. "You'll want to pay attention for what comes next. It's educational." On the communication screens, the other tribunal members watched in horror as their colleague was confronted by this impossible figure. They shouted orders to their own security forces, demanded immediate military intervention, and tried to contact Coalition High Command. None of their communications went through. Throughout the galaxy, a network that human engineers had spent decades infiltrating was now under new management. "Let me tell you about justice," Baba Yaga continued, his attention focused entirely on Korthak. "Your species evolved from pack hunters, didn't they? Creatures that surrounded their prey and took turns tearing pieces away until nothing remained but bones and fear." Korthak tried to speak, but found that his voice had abandoned him entirely. "Humans evolved differently. We were persistence hunters. We didn't need to be the fastest or the strongest. We just needed to never stop coming. We would follow our prey across continents, through seasons, across years if necessary. And when we finally caught them, it wasn't pack tactics or overwhelming force that brought them down." The armored figure reached out with one gauntleted hand and placed it almost gently on Korthak's massive shoulder. It was patience, it was intelligence, and it was the absolute certainty that no matter how far they ran or how well they hid, we would always find them in the end. The chamber's main door exploded inward, and Coalition security forces poured through the opening. Heavily armed soldiers in powered armor, trained to handle any conceivable threat, raised their weapons and prepared to fire. They found an empty chamber. Korthak stood alone in the center of the room, his four arms trembling with terror. Baba Yaga had vanished as silently as he had appeared. "Where is he?" the security team leader demanded. "Where did the intruder go?" Korthak opened his mouth to respond, but instead of words he made a sound that his species had never produced before, a whimper of pure fear. Attached to his ceremonial robes was a small device, obviously of human manufacture. The device activated with a soft chime, and suddenly Baba Yaga's voice filled the chamber, though the figure himself was nowhere to be seen. "This is a message for the Andromeda Coalition, its member species, and anyone else who believes that justice was served today. You executed a 16-year-old boy and celebrated his death. You broadcast his murder across the galaxy as entertainment." The security forces frantically scanned the chamber with every sensor they possessed, but there was no trace of the source. The voice seemed to come from the walls themselves. "You did this because you believed humans were a young, violent species that needed to be taught their place through fear and intimidation. You thought that killing one child would break the will of our entire race." Throughout the galaxy, on every coalition world, the message was being broadcast simultaneously. Human infiltrators who had spent years building lives as ordinary citizens were activating systems that coalition security had never known existed. You were wrong about humans, about violence, and about justice. The images that appeared on screens throughout coalition space showed scenes that their intelligence agencies had insisted were impossible. Fleets of human ships, massive beyond anything the coalition had believed humans could construct, moving through hyperspace towards strategic targets. These weren't the improvised raiders and converted freighters that the coalition was used to dealing with. These were purpose-built warships that incorporated technology the coalition's scientists would have called impossible. "My name is John Chen. My son called me Dad. My friends called me John. My enemies called me Baba Yaga. Today, you all become my enemies." The first strike hit the coalition's primary military shipyard at Kepler Station. The station's defenders had 17 minutes to realize they were under attack, send out distress signals, and prepare for battle. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace was unlike anything in Coalition records. Ships that seemed to bend light around them, weapons that fired rounds of compressed space-time, and shields that turned the station's most powerful weapons into harmless light shows. The battle lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. When it ended, Kepler Station was a rapidly expanding cloud of debris, and 17,000 Coalition military personnel had learned what humans meant by overwhelming force. But the ships that had destroyed the station were already gone, having jumped back into hyperspace before Coalition reinforcements could arrive. The only thing they left behind was a message buoy broadcasting a single line of text in 47 different languages. This is what justice looks like when humans decide to teach it. Back on Tribunal Prime, Supreme Arbiter Korthak was finally able to speak. "How?" he whispered to the empty chamber. "How did you get past our security? How did you get into the building?" The voice that answered him seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, as if the building itself was responding. "I've been here for 3 days. I was here when you sentenced my son. I was here when you celebrated his death. I was here when you went to sleep last night, standing at the foot of your bed, watching you dream." The security forces raised their weapons toward the ceiling, toward the walls, toward shadows that might contain threats. But there was nothing to shoot at, nothing to target except the growing certainty that they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. "Your coalition has existed for 12,000 years, the voice continued. "In all that time, you've never encountered a species quite like humans. You've fought warriors who were stronger than you, scientists who were more intelligent, assassins who were more subtle, but you've never fought a species that was more patient." The chamber's main screen activated, showing tactical displays that made the Coalition's military leaders feel sick. Every major installation in Coalition space was highlighted in red, with detailed analysis of defenses, patrol schedules, and structural weaknesses. The data was impossibly complete, suggesting surveillance operations that had been ongoing for decades. "We've been watching you longer than you've known we existed, learning your languages, your customs, your fears. We've walked among you as diplomats and traders, as scientists and artists. We've been in your homes, your schools, your government buildings." The images shifted to show surveillance footage from across the galaxy. Humans in Coalition facilities, humans with access to classified information, humans who had been trusted members of alien society for years or even decades. "You thought you were executing a terrorist today. You were actually executing the son of the man who has been planning your education for the past 20 years. Marcus never knew. I made sure of that. He genuinely believed in peace between our species. He died believing that his death might somehow bridge the gap between us." The tactical display zoomed in on Tribunal Prime itself, showing detailed schematics of the building they were standing in, complete with real-time positions of every person inside. He was wrong, but not about the galaxy needing to learn. "Today begins your education in what humans are really capable of when you take everything we love away from us." Throughout Coalition space, the attacks began in earnest. Not random strikes or terror attacks, but surgical operations that demonstrated an understanding of Coalition psychology that their own experts had never achieved. Military installations were destroyed with such precision that civilian casualties were almost non-existent. But the message was unmistakable. Human forces could strike anywhere, anytime, with perfect accuracy. "This is Lesson 1, Baba Yaga's voice continued, as reports of successful strikes poured in from across the galaxy. "Humans are not the violent savages you believed us to be. We are something much worse. We are intelligent, patient, and utterly committed to protecting what we love." Supreme Arbiter Korthak sank into his ceremonial chair, his forearms shaking as he processed what was happening. The Coalition was under attack by an enemy they had never understood, using tactics they had never imagined, with technology they had believed impossible. "Lesson 2 begins tomorrow," the voice said as it began to fade. You will learn about escalation, about what happens when humans stop holding back, about what we become when you force us to abandon the peaceful coexistence my son died believing in. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of emergency systems. The security forces slowly lowered their weapons, realizing that their target was long gone and might never have been there in the first place. On screens throughout the complex, damage reports continued to pour in. 17 major military installations destroyed, 3 coalition fleets eliminated, 43 intelligence gathering stations reduced to atoms, and in every case, the attacks had been carried out with such precision that no innocent civilians had been harmed. It was a demonstration of power so complete, so overwhelming, that the coalition's military leaders began to understand the true scope of their mistake. They had executed a child believing it would break human spirits. Instead, they had awakened something that had been sleeping in the darkness between the stars. And tomorrow, Baba Yaga had promised them Lesson 2. The Revelation. The emergency session of the Coalition High Council convened 18 hours after the first wave of human attacks. Representatives from 47 member species gathered in the most secure location in the galaxy, a massive space station hidden in the gravitational shadow of a black hole where no sensors could penetrate and no weapons could reach. Or so they had believed. Chancellor Vorth Ak, the elected leader of the coalition, stood before the assembly with all 6 of his species' arms spread in a gesture that traditionally conveyed both authority and desperation. His crystalline carapace, normally a brilliant blue, had faded to the gray color that indicated extreme stress. "Fellow beings," he began, his voice carrying through translation matrices to accommodate species that communicated through everything from electromagnetic pulses to controlled chemical releases. "We face an unprecedented crisis. In the span of 17 standard hours, human forces have demonstrated military capabilities that our intelligence services insisted were impossible." The massive chamber buzzed with the sounds of 47 different species expressing alarm. Holographic displays showed the tactical situation throughout Coalition space. Red markers indicating destroyed installations, yellow markers showing facilities under attack, and an ominous growing pattern that suggested the humans were following some kind of predetermined strategy. "The human known as Baba Yaga has promised us what he calls Lesson 2, Chancellor Vorthak continued. "Our xenopsychology experts have been analyzing his communications, and their conclusions are disturbing." The chamber's main screen activated, showing the face of Dr. Istala, the coalition's leading expert on human psychology. Her serpentine features betrayed a level of concern that made the assembled representatives shift uncomfortably. "Honored Council," Dr. Yisatala hissed, her forked tongue tasting the tension in the recycled air. "We have made a fundamental error in our understanding of human nature. We believed their emotional attachments to their offspring made them vulnerable to intimidation. We were catastrophically wrong." The screen split to show psychological profiles that the Coalition's intelligence services had spent decades compiling on various human populations. Humans do not respond to threats against their children the way our models predicted. Where we expected submission, we have created an enemy whose motivations transcend rational behavior. This individual, John Chen, appears to have abandoned all human social constraints in response to his son's execution. Admiral Korthak, the Coalition's highest-ranking military officer, stood on his species' equivalent of legs. His insectoid form clicked with agitation as he addressed the assembly. "The tactical situation is beyond critical," he chittered through his translation device. "The human fleets are using technology we cannot counter. Their ships appear to exist partially outside normal space-time, making them effectively invisible to our sensors until they choose to attack. Their weapons operate on principles our physicists are calling impossible." He gestured to the holographic display, which zoomed in on the wreckage of Kepler Station. "This installation, was defended by the newest shields in our arsenal. The human weapons passed through them as if they weren't there. They aren't using brute force, Council members. They're using science we don't understand. Chancellor Vorthic's carapace shifted to an even deeper gray. What are our options, Admiral? Militarily? None. The blunt statement sent shockwaves through the chamber. Our forces are designed to fight conventional enemies using conventional tactics. The humans are fighting a war we don't know how to participate in. That's when the lights went out. Emergency power should have activated immediately, but the council chamber remained in absolute darkness. 47 different species began making sounds of alarm in their various ways, but underneath it all, that haunting piano melody began to play again. Für Elise drifted through the chamber like a funeral dirge, and when the emergency lighting finally activated, every representative in the room found themselves staring at a figure that should not have been able to exist in their current location. Baba Yaga stood at the center of the chamber, his black armor seeming to absorb the red emergency lighting. He had somehow appeared in the most secure location in Coalition space without triggering a single alarm or alert. Lesson 2, he said simply, his modulated voice carrying clearly to every corner of the chamber, is about inevitability. Security forces poured through every entrance, but stopped when Baba Yaga raised a single gauntleted hand. The motion was so casual, so confident, that it carried more authority than any weapon. I could have killed all of you, he stated matter-of-factly. Every single representative, every security guard, every technician in this station. You are alive because I choose to let you live. For now. Chancellor Vorthak found his voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. What do you want? I want you to understand what you did when you executed my son. You didn't kill a terrorist. You killed the one person in the universe who believed your species could learn to coexist with humanity as equals. The armored figure began walking slowly around the chamber, and every being present felt their ancient instincts screaming that a predator was among them. Marcus spent his short life studying your cultures, your philosophies, your art. He learned 47 different languages so he could read your literature in the original texts. He believed that understanding would lead to peace. Baba Yaga stopped directly in front of the Chancellor. He was wrong. Some species only understand strength. Some civilizations only respond to fear. Some cultures mistake mercy for weakness and kindness for vulnerability. The chamber's communication systems activated without anyone touching the controls, broadcasting this conversation across the entire coalition. You have spent 12,000 years as the dominant power in this galaxy. You have grown comfortable with the idea that your word is law, that your justice is absolute, that your civilization represents the pinnacle of evolution. Images began appearing on screens throughout the chamber, not tactical displays or military readouts, but something far more disturbing, documentary footage of coalition peacekeeping operations over the millennia, species that had been wiped out for refusing to join the coalition, worlds that had been sterilized for the crime of technological independence, entire civilizations that had been enslaved and called member species for the sake of political correctness. You are not the heroes of this galaxy, Baba Yaga continued as the evidence of coalition brutality played for all to see. You are the same thing you have always been, predators who have grown fat and lazy on the suffering of weaker species. Admiral Korthak made the mistake of reaching for his sidearm. He never completed the motion. Baba Yaga moved with that impossible speed again, and suddenly the Admiral was flat on his back with an armored boot on his thorax. 12,000 years, the human said, applying just enough pressure to crack the Admiral's carapace. And you still haven't learned the most basic truth about violence. The most dangerous enemy is the one who has nothing left to lose. He released the Admiral and returned his attention to the assembled representatives. You executed my son because you wanted to send a message to humanity. Here is our response. The screens changed to show a map of coalition space, but now it was overlaid with information that made every military leader in the chamber feel physically sick. Every defensive position was marked, every fleet movement was tracked, every secret installation was highlighted and labeled. For 20 years, I have been preparing for the day when your coalition would reveal its true nature. I hoped that day would never come. I allowed myself to believe that Marcus might be right about the possibility of peace. The armored figure's helmet turned toward each representative in turn, and every being that met his gaze felt as if they were looking into the face of their own extinction. Yesterday, you proved that peace was never an option. You proved that the only language you understand is violence. You have asked for a demonstration of human capabilities. The map zoomed in to show coalition worlds, billions of beings going about their daily lives, unaware that their fate was being decided in this chamber. I am going to give you exactly what you asked for. That's when the Chancellor realized what he was looking at. The positions marked on the map weren't just military targets. They were population centers, civilian worlds. The heart of coalition civilization. You're talking about genocide, Chancellor Vorthak whispered. No, Baba Yaga replied calmly. I'm talking about justice. Your coalition has spent 12 millennia conquering, enslaving, and exterminating any species that refused to bow to your authority. You have never faced consequences for these actions because you were always the strongest force in the galaxy. The armored figure reached out and touched the holographic display, causing it to shift and show detailed casualty projections. You are no longer the strongest force in the galaxy. That distinction now belongs to a species you tried to intimidate by murdering a child. The numbers on the screen were staggering. Conservative estimates showed coalition casualties in the hundreds of billions if the human fleets carried out their apparent objectives. I am offering you one chance to avoid this outcome, Baba Yaga continued. One opportunity to demonstrate that your species can learn from their mistakes. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft sounds of various aliens breathing, circulating fluids, or maintaining whatever biological processes kept them alive. Surrender. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Dissolve the coalition. Release every enslaved species. Return every conquered world to its original inhabitants. Submit to judgment by a tribunal composed of the species you have wronged. Chancellor Vorthak's carapace cycled through several colors that indicated shock, disbelief, and growing anger. That is impossible. The coalition has maintained peace and order in this galaxy for 12,000 years. The coalition has maintained its own power for 12,000 years, Baba Yaga corrected. Peace and order are not the same thing as submission and fear. The armored figure began walking toward the chamber's exit, but his voice continued to fill the room. You have 72 standard hours to begin the surrender process. If coalition forces fire a single shot at human ships during that time, the offer is withdrawn permanently. He paused at the exit and turned back to face the assembly one final time. My son believed that different species could learn to respect each other as equals. He died believing that his sacrifice might somehow convince you to embrace that possibility. He was naive, but he was also the best of what humanity could become. The chamber's environmental systems suddenly filled with a new sound, the voices of human children singing. It was a lullaby, sung in perfect harmony, heartbreakingly beautiful, and utterly innocent. That is what you destroyed when you executed Marcus. That is what you chose to eliminate from the universe. The belief that there was goodness in you worth preserving. As the children's voices faded, Baba Yaga's modulated tone took on a quality that made every being in the chamber feel the weight of their own mortality. Now you will learn what we become when that belief dies. You will discover what humans are capable of when we stop trying to find the good in our enemies and start treating them as what they have always been." The figure in black armor stepped through the exit and vanished into shadows that seemed to swallow light itself. 72 hours, his voice echoed from the chamber's communication systems. "Choose carefully." The emergency session continued for another 18 hours, but the debate was largely academic. Some representatives argued for immediate surrender. Others demanded that the coalition's full military might be brought to bear against the human threat. A few suggested attempting to negotiate some middle ground. None of them truly understood what they were facing. In the darkness between the stars, human fleets that had been waiting for 20 years began moving toward their final positions. Ships that incorporated technology borrowed from species the coalition had exterminated, powered by energy sources that traditional physics said couldn't exist, crewed by humans who had spent their entire adult lives preparing for this moment. John Chen sat in the command chair of his flagship, watching the countdown timer that marked how much time remained before the coalition's grace period expired. Around him, his bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency of people who knew they were about to participate in the most significant military operation in galactic history. The man they called Baba Yaga had removed his helmet, revealing a face that bore the weight of terrible decisions and unforgivable necessities. He looked exactly like what he was, a father who had lost the most precious thing in the universe and discovered that grief, when properly focused, could reshape the balance of power across entire star systems. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the Coalition Council has been in session for 17 hours. No decision yet." John nodded slowly. He had expected this. The Coalition had never faced a threat they couldn't simply overwhelm with superior numbers. They literally didn't know how to surrender. "Very well," he said quietly. "Signal all task forces. Begin final approach to target systems." Throughout Coalition space, the most powerful civilization in galactic history was about to learn the lesson that Marcus Chen had died trying to prevent them from needing. Some teachers use words, others use consequences, and sometimes the universe itself demands that certain lessons be written in fire across the stars, so that future generations will never forget the price of cruelty disguised as justice. The countdown timer reached 0. Lesson 3 began. The Galactic Broadcasting Network's main studio buzzed with an energy that felt different today. Zephyrian news anchor Vex Atala adjusted her crystalline throat modifier one final time before the cameras rolled. Today's broadcast would reach every inhabited world in the Andromeda Coalition, spanning 47 star systems and over 200 billion sentient beings. "Citizens of the Coalition," Vex Tala began, her melodic voice carrying through quantum transmitters across space. "Today we witness justice served against the human menace that has plagued our peaceful galaxy for far too long." The camera panned across the massive execution chamber on Tribunal Prime, the Coalition's judicial heart. Thousands of alien dignitaries filled the crystalline amphitheater, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and textures. Methane-breathing Corvalians sat in their environmental suits next to the elegant, tree-like Sylvanoids. Energy beings from the Plasma Nebula flickered in their containment fields, while the massive, stone-skinned granitoids took up entire sections with their bulk. At the center of it all stood a small platform, and chained to that platform was a human boy. Marcus Chen was only 16 years old, though his young face had been hardened by months of captivity and interrogation. His dark hair hung in messy strands over eyes that held no fear, only a quiet determination that unnerved even his captors. The energy restraints around his wrists and ankles hummed softly, designed to contain beings far stronger than any human. Supreme Arbiter Korthok, a 12-foot-tall being whose species had evolved from ancient predators, stepped forward. His four arms gestured dramatically as he addressed the crowd and the cameras. "This human child," Korthak's voice boomed through the chamber's acoustics, "stands convicted of the most heinous crimes known to our civilized galaxy: terrorism, mass murder, the destruction of 3 coalition research stations, the deaths of over 8,000 innocent scientists and their families." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some species communicated through color changes, others through electromagnetic pulses, but the sentiment was universal: satisfaction at seeing justice done. Marcus lifted his head slightly, and for just a moment the camera caught his expression. There was no remorse there, no plea for mercy, just a cold acceptance and something else that the Coalition's xenopsychologists couldn't quite interpret. "Before we proceed," Korthak continued, "the condemned will be given one final opportunity to speak. Human child, do you have any last words before your sentence is carried out?" The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems accommodating dozens of different atmospheric requirements. Every camera focused on Marcus as he slowly stood straighter despite his restraints. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but somehow carried perfectly through the chamber's audio systems. "You think you know what humans are. You think you understand what you're doing here today. You're about to learn how wrong you are." He paused, and a small smile touched his lips. It wasn't the smile of a frightened child facing death. It was something far more disturbing. "My name is Marcus Chen. I am the son of John Chen, and you just made the biggest mistake in galactic history." Some of the alien dignitaries shifted uncomfortably. The name John Chen meant nothing to most of them, but there was something in the boy's tone that suggested it should. Supreme Arbiter Korthak raised his primary hand. "Enough. Marcus Chen, by the authority of the Andromeda Coalition and the unanimous verdict of the Galactic Tribunal, you are hereby sentenced to death by molecular disintegration. May your atoms return peacefully to the cosmos you sought to disrupt." The execution device descended from the chamber's ceiling, a sophisticated piece of Coalition technology that would break down every molecular bond in Marcus's body simultaneously. It was considered the most humane method of execution available, as death was instantaneous and painless. Marcus closed his eyes and whispered something too quiet for the microphones to catch. But alien lip readers in the audience and watching throughout the galaxy caught the single word he repeated 3 times like a prayer or an incantation. "Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga." The device activated with a soft blue glow. For exactly 2.7 seconds, Marcus Chen existed as both matter and energy, suspended between life and death. Then the light faded, and where a human boy had stood, only empty air remained. The crowd erupted in cheers, clicks, hums, and various forms of approval across dozens of species. Justice had been served. The human terrorist was dead. The galaxy was safe. Supreme Arbiter Korthak raised his arms for silence. "Let this be a message to all human settlements throughout Coalition space. Your species' violent tendencies will not be tolerated. Attempt to harm Coalition citizens, and you will face the same fate as this child." The broadcast continued for another hour, with expert commentary from military leaders and xenobiologists discussing human psychology and the necessity of firm action against their aggressive nature. They spoke of humans as a young, violent species that needed careful monitoring and strict boundaries. None of them noticed the small sensor array that had been discreetly observing the execution from a cloaked reconnaissance probe 3 light minutes away. None of them detected the quantum burst transmission that shot out into deep space the moment Marcus Chen's atoms dispersed. And none of them had bothered to research exactly who John Chen was. The transmission traveled through hyperspace, following routes known only to human smugglers and pirates. It passed through dead systems where no coalition patrols ventured, bounced off automated relay stations hidden in asteroid fields, and finally reached its destination 67 hours after Marcus Chen's death. The message was simple: a video recording of the execution, biographical data on everyone involved in the tribunal's decision, and a detailed analysis of coalition military positions throughout the Andromeda galaxy. It arrived at a space station that officially didn't exist, orbiting a planet that had been marked as uninhabitable on all coalition star charts. The station was massive, easily the size of a small moon, but its entire hull was composed of materials that bent light and sensor waves around it like water around a stone. Inside the station, in a chamber that had been designed to accommodate one specific individual's psychological needs, a man sat in perfect stillness. The chamber was sparse, containing only a simple chair, a small table, and walls lined with an eclectic collection of weapons from dozens of worlds. Some were traditional human weapons, others were alien artifacts, acquired through means the Coalition would have found deeply disturbing. John Chen hadn't moved for 6 hours. He sat like a statue, hands folded in his lap, breathing so slowly that his chest barely rose and fell. His eyes were closed, but he wasn't sleeping. He was waiting. When the transmission arrived, it triggered a soft chime that echoed through the chamber. John's eyes opened slowly, revealing a gaze that seemed to contain depths no human should possess. He was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and a lean build that spoke of decades of physical conditioning. His hands bore scars from 1,000 different blades, and his face carried lines that told stories of violence and loss. But it was his eyes that would have given Coalition psychologists nightmares. They held the kind of patient, calculating intelligence that apex predators developed over millions of years of evolution. John stood and walked to the communication console. The message played in its entirety, showing him his son's final moments in perfect crystalline detail. He watched Supreme Arbiter Korthak pronounce sentence. He saw the alien crowd cheer for Marcus's death. He observed the satisfaction on alien faces as his child was reduced to atoms. Throughout the entire recording, John's expression never changed. He might have been watching a weather report for all the emotion he displayed. When the transmission ended, John stood in silence for exactly 10 minutes. Then he moved to the communication array and activated a network that spanned dozens of star systems. "This is Baba Yaga," he said simply. "Operational authorization 77 Alpha. Execute Protocol Omega." Throughout human space, on worlds the Coalition didn't know existed, and in fleets that had been building in the darkness between stars, the message was received and understood. John Chen had many names. To human colonists on the frontier worlds, he was a legend whispered around campfires, the ghost who appeared when entire families vanished from alien raids, leaving behind only corpses and the smell of fear. To the criminal underworld, he was the man you hired when you wanted someone not just dead, but erased from existence so completely that even their enemies would forget they had ever lived. To the Coalition, he had been John Chen, a simple freighter pilot who had lost his wife to alien pirates and retired to raise his son in peace. But to the universe itself, he was something much older and more terrible. He was Baba Yaga, the monster that other monsters warned their children about, and they had just killed his son. John walked to a sealed chamber at the heart of the station. Inside, hanging like a second skin, was a suit of armor that had been crafted from materials harvested from the corpses of alien warlords. It was black as the space between stars and covered in systems that human technology shouldn't have been able to create. As he began to put on the armor, piece by piece, John spoke to the empty chamber in a voice that carried the weight of coming apocalypse. Marcus, my son, you were always too gentle for this universe. You thought there was good in them, thought they could learn to see humans as equals rather than animals to be caged or put down. I tried to believe that for your sake. I tried to let you show me a better way. The helmet sealed with a soft hiss, and John's voice now carried the electronic modulation that would become the stuff of nightmares across the galaxy. They chose to show me that I was right all along. There is no peace between predator and prey. There is no coexistence between the hunter and the hunted. He picked up a weapon that Coalition scientists would have insisted was impossible, something that existed in the borderland between technology and pure malevolence. I gave them one chance. I gave them my son's gentle heart and peaceful ways. They spat on that gift and fed my child to their bloodthirsty crowds. John Chen, who was now something far more and far less than human, walked toward his ship. It waited in the station's docking bay like a sleeping beast, all sharp angles and predatory lines. No scanner in Coalition space could detect it, no weapon they possessed could harm it, and no ship they had ever built could outrun it. They wanted to see the monster they insisted we humans must be, Baba Yaga whispered, as systems throughout the station began powering down. He would not be returning. I am going to show them exactly what monsters look like. The ship launched in perfect silence, already invisible to every sensor the Coalition possessed. Its destination was Tribunal Prime, where Supreme Arbiter Korthak was even now celebrating the successful execution with his fellow justices. Korthak and his colleagues had no idea that death was coming for them. They had no comprehension of the forces they had set in motion or the consequences that their actions would bring. They had killed Marcus Chen believing it would send a message to humanity about the price of violence. They were about to learn that some messages should never be sent. And in the darkness between the stars, other ships began to move. Human vessels that had been waiting in the void for a signal that they had hoped would never come. Each ship carried crew members who had sworn an oath long ago, who had promised to answer when Baba Yaga called, no matter the cost. The Coalition had just started a war they couldn't understand against an enemy they had never imagined. The execution of Marcus Chen had ended. The education of the galaxy was about to begin.